Maya stood in front of the mirror and smiled at her reflection. The white wedding dress fit perfectly around her body, and the fabric felt soft against her skin. She had waited 3 long years for this day to come. 3 years of serving on Mars Colony 7, 3 years of missing Earth, and 3 years of dreaming about marrying the man she loved. Her best friend Lisa helped adjust the veil on her head. Lisa had been crying since morning and her eyes were red and puffy. Maya laughed and told her to stop crying or she would start crying too. The small room behind the chapel was filled with flowers and the sweet smell made everything feel magical. Outside the door, Maya could hear people talking and laughing. Friends from the military, family members who had traveled from different colonies, and neighbors from her childhood home in Seattle. Everyone had come to see her marry Jake Morrison, the man who had saved her life during a rescue mission near Jupiter 2 years ago. Jake was a captain in the United Earth Defense Force, and he was brave and kind. Maya remembered the day she met him. Her ship had been damaged by debris and she was floating in space with only 30 minutes of oxygen left. Jake had piloted his rescue pod through a dangerous field of broken metal and ice to reach her. When he pulled her into his pod, the first thing he said was that she had beautiful eyes. Maya had laughed even though she was scared and cold. Now it was 2247 and humanity lived on Mars, Venus, and even some moons around Jupiter and Saturn. Earth was still home to billions of people, but many had left to build new lives among the stars. Maya had grown up in Seattle but joined the military when she was 18. She wanted to explore space and protect the colonies that were growing across the solar system. Her mother walked into the room and tears filled her eyes when she saw Maya in the wedding dress. She hugged her daughter tightly and whispered that she was proud of her. Maya felt warmth spread through her chest. Her father had died 5 years ago, but she knew he would have been happy to see this day. The music started playing in the chapel, and Lisa handed Maya her bouquet of white roses. The flowers had been grown in the Mars hydroponics lab where Maya worked between missions. She had specially requested them because they reminded her of home and her new life in the colonies. Maya walked toward the chapel doors and took a deep breath. Through the small window in the door, she could see Jake standing at the altar. He wore his dress uniform and looked handsome with his blonde hair neatly combed. Next to him stood his best man, Lieutenant Carlos Martinez, who Maya had also served with on Mars. The doors opened and everyone in the chapel stood up. Maya walked down the aisle slowly, trying to remember every detail of this moment. She saw her mother crying in the front row. She saw her friends from the military standing in their uniforms with medals shining on their chests. She saw elderly neighbors who had known her since she was a little girl. Jake's face lit up when he saw her walking toward him. His blue eyes sparkled with tears and he smiled so wide that Maya thought her heart would burst from happiness. She reached the altar and took his hands in hers. They felt warm and strong. The ceremony was beautiful and simple. The chaplain spoke about love and commitment and building a life together. Jake and Maya exchanged rings that had been made from metal, taken from an asteroid they had both helped mine during a mission. The rings were silver and simple, but they meant everything to both of them. When the chaplain said Jake could kiss his bride, everyone cheered and clapped. Maya felt Jake's lips on hers, and she knew that this was the happiest moment of her entire life. Nothing could ruin this perfect day. After the ceremony, Maya and Jake stood outside the chapel greeting guests. Everyone wanted to take pictures and congratulate them. Commander Stevens, who led their unit on Mars, shook Jake's hand and told him he was lucky to marry such a brave pilot. Lisa hugged Maya again and cried some more. The reception was planned at a beautiful venue across the city. Maya and Jake had rented a car so they could have a few minutes alone together before joining everyone at the party. They wanted to drive through the city and talk about their future. They had plans to request a joint assignment on one of the new colonies being built near Saturn. They wanted to start a family and raise children among the stars. Jake helped Maya into the car and made sure her dress was tucked in safely before closing the door. He walked around to the driver's side and got in. The car was a simple electric model that drove smoothly through the Seattle streets. Maya held Jake's hand as he drove, and they both laughed about how nervous they had been during the ceremony. The city looked beautiful in the afternoon sunlight. Buildings reached high into the sky and flying vehicles zoomed overhead. Earth had changed so much in the past 100 years, but Seattle still felt like home to Maya. The Space Needle still stood tall in the Distance and the water of Puget Sound sparkled blue and calm. Maya told Jake about how Lisa had cried through the entire morning, and Jake laughed. He said Carlos had been nervous too and had dropped the rings twice before the ceremony. They talked about their honeymoon plans to visit the floating cities on Venus and maybe take a trip to the ice caves on Europa. Everything felt perfect and right. Maya looked at her new husband and felt grateful for every moment that had led them to this day. She thought about the dangerous missions they had survived, the long months apart when they were stationed at different colonies, and all the video calls where they talked for hours about their dreams. The future stretched out before them like an open road through the stars. They would explore new worlds together, protect humanity together, and build a beautiful life together. Maya squeezed Jake's hand and he smiled at her. Nothing could go wrong on such a perfect day. Nothing could take away their happiness. They were together, and that was all that mattered. The car moved smoothly through traffic, and Maya watched the city pass by outside her window. She felt peaceful and calm and completely in love. Jake drove carefully through the streets of Seattle with Maya sitting beside him in her beautiful wedding dress. They were laughing about something Carlos had said during the ceremony, when Jake noticed red and blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror. He frowned and looked down at the speedometer. He had been driving exactly at the speed limit. Maya turned around to look at the police car behind them. Her stomach felt tight with worry, but she told herself everything would be fine. They had done nothing wrong. Jake was a careful driver, and they were just going to their reception. Jake pulled the car over to the side of the road and put it in park. He kept his hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. His military training had taught him to stay calm in difficult situations. Maya sat quietly beside him and tried to smile, but she felt nervous. 2 officers got out of the police car. The first officer was tall with dark hair and a mean look on his face. His nameplate said Harris. The second officer was shorter with red hair, and his nameplate said Tucker. Maya watched as Tucker opened the back door of the police car and a large dog jumped out. The dog was not a normal dog. It had metal parts attached to its body and blue lights glowed from the mechanical pieces. Maya recognized it immediately. She had seen dogs like this during her military service. They were cybernetic K9 units that had been used in combat zones. But this model had been discontinued years ago because it was too dangerous. The mechanical parts made the dog stronger and more aggressive than natural animals. Officer Harris walked up to Jake's window and knocked hard on the glass. Jake lowered the window and smiled politely. The officer did not smile back. His eyes moved past Jake and stared at Maya with a look that made her skin feel cold. Harris demanded Jake's license and registration in a harsh voice. Jake reached slowly for his wallet and pulled out his license. He handed it to the officer along with the vehicle registration. Harris barely looked at the documents. His attention stayed fixed on Maya. Jake asked politely if there was a problem. He explained that they had not been speeding and the car was a rental with all proper documentation. Harris ignored him completely. He told both of them to step out of the vehicle immediately. Maya's heart started beating faster. She looked at Jake and saw concern in his eyes. She placed her hand on his arm and told him quietly that everything would be okay. They had done nothing wrong and this would just take a few minutes. Then they would be on their way to the reception where their friends were waiting. Jake asked the officer again what this was about. His voice was calm, but Maya could hear the edge of worry in it. Harris raised his voice and told them both to get out of the car right now. His hand moved toward the weapon on his belt. Maya took a deep breath and opened her car door. She stepped out carefully, making sure not to trip on her long wedding dress. The white fabric moved in the breeze and she felt exposed, standing on the side of the road in her formal clothing. Jake got out on his side and walked around the car to stand next to her. Officer Tucker brought the cybernetic dog closer. The animal growled low in its throat and the blue lights on its mechanical parts glowed brighter. Maya kept her eyes on the dog. She knew how dangerous these units could be. She had seen one tear through a metal door during a training exercise. Harris looked at Maya's military dress uniform that she wore under her wedding dress. The uniform had medals pinned to the chest. Each medal represented a mission she had completed or a brave action she had taken. She had earned every single one of them through hard work and courage. The officer sneered at the medals. He said something that made Maya's blood run cold. He said that colonists came back to Earth thinking they were better than everyone else. He said they took jobs and resources away from people, who were born on Earth. He said people like Maya did not deserve respect. Jake stepped forward and tried to explain that Maya was a decorated officer in the United Earth Defense Force. He started to list her accomplishments and the missions she had flown. He said she had saved lives and protected colonies across the solar system. Harris cut him off with a sharp laugh. He said he did not care if Maya was the Queen of Mars. He said colonists were not welcome on Earth anymore. He said they needed to learn their place. Maya felt anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. She had faced pirates and dangerous situations in space. She had kept calm during emergencies when lives depended on her clear thinking. She could handle one prejudiced officer. She spoke to Harris in a calm, steady voice. She asked what he wanted them to do. She said they were on their way to their wedding reception, and many people were waiting for them. She offered to show him any identification or documentation he needed. Harris ignored her words. He looked at her medals again and said something even worse. He accused her of stealing them. He said someone like her could not have earned those medals honestly. He said she must have taken them from a real soldier. The accusation was absurd and insulting. Every medal in the United Earth Defense Force was registered in a central database. Each one was linked to biometric data and service records. Anyone with access to a computer could verify that the medals belonged to Maya and that she had earned them legitimately. Jake pulled out his personal communication device. He said he could prove right now that the medals were real. He could pull up Maya's service record and show it to the officers. His hands shook slightly as he tried to access the database. But before he could finish, Harris gave a command to the dog. He shouted one word that changed everything. He told the cybernetic canine to attack. The dog lunged forward with mechanical speed. Its metal parts whirred and the blue lights blazed bright. Jake threw himself in front of Maya, but the dog was too fast. Its jaws, enhanced with mechanical parts and metal teeth, closed around Maya's arm. Maya screamed. The pain was sharp and terrible. She felt the mechanical teeth pierce through the fabric of her wedding dress and sink into her flesh. The beautiful white dress that she had put on just an hour ago was now torn and stained with blood. Jake grabbed the dog and tried to pull it away from Maya. He shouted at Harris to call the animal back. He begged the officer to stop this. But Harris just stood there watching with a smile on his face. He held up his body camera to record everything that was happening. Officer Tucker made a weak attempt to look concerned, but he did nothing to help. He stood back and watched as the cybernetic dog continued its attack. Maya's training kicked in even through the pain. She knew how to fight. She had combat training and she was strong. But she was on Earth at her own wedding, and she did not want to hurt an animal that was just following commands. The dog was not evil. It was just a tool being used by a hateful person. The pain grew worse and Maya felt dizzy. Blood ran down her arm and dripped onto the street. Her vision started to blur and she could not focus on anything. She heard sirens in the distance growing louder. She heard Jake's voice calling her name over and over. The last thing Maya saw before darkness took her was the sky above Seattle. It was blue and clear and beautiful. Then everything went black and she felt nothing at all. Maya opened her eyes slowly and bright light made her squint. Everything looked blurry and white. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy and tired. Her right arm hurt with a deep aching pain that made her want to cry out. A face appeared above her and Maya recognized Jake. His eyes were red and tired. Dark circles surrounded them and his blonde hair looked messy. He wore the same dress uniform from the wedding, but it was wrinkled and stained. When he saw her eyes open, tears started running down his cheeks. Jake grabbed her left hand and held it tightly. He told her she was in the hospital and she had been unconscious for 3 days. 3 whole days had passed since the attack. Maya tried to speak, but her throat was dry and her voice came out as a whisper. A nurse came into the room and checked the machines next to Maya's bed. She smiled kindly and brought Maya some water. The cool liquid felt good going down her throat. Maya asked what happened to her arm. The nurse explained that the cybernetic dog had caused severe damage. The mechanical teeth had torn through muscle and tissue. Doctors had performed surgery to repair the damage, but Maya would need physical therapy to regain full use of her arm. Maya looked at her right arm and saw thick bandages covering it from shoulder to wrist. Pain medication dripped into her veins through a tube, but she could still feel the throbbing ache underneath. Her beautiful wedding dress was gone. She wore a hospital gown now and felt exposed and vulnerable. Jake sat down in the chair next to her bed. He looked like he had not slept in days. He told her that he had not left the hospital since they brought her in. Friends had brought him food and clean clothes, but he refused to go home. He wanted to be there when she woke up. Maya asked about the officers. Her voice was stronger now after drinking the water. Jake's face darkened with anger. He told her that Harris and Tucker had both been arrested. Other officers who responded to the scene had seen what happened. They had pulled the cybernetic dog off Maya and called for an ambulance immediately. But there was more to the story. A special investigator named Captain Nicole Stevens had been assigned to the case. What she discovered shocked everyone. Harris was not just a bad officer making a terrible mistake. He belonged to a hate group called Earth First. Jake explained that Earth First was an underground organization that believed colonists were dangerous. They thought people who lived and worked in space were becoming less human. The group believed that colonists should not be allowed to return to Earth. They wanted to keep Earth pure for people who had been born there. Maya felt sick to her stomach. She had risked her life protecting Earth and the colonies. She had spent years in space making sure supply ships could travel safely. She had helped rescue people during emergencies. And this group thought she was less than human because she chose to serve off-world. Jake continued talking. His voice was tight with anger, but he tried to stay calm for Maya. He told her that Harris had been using stolen military equipment. The cybernetic K-9 unit should never have been in the hands of local police. Those units had been discontinued years ago because they were too dangerous. Several people had died during testing, and the military decided the dogs were too aggressive for regular use. Earth First had been stealing decommissioned equipment from military bases. They had weapons and technology that should have been destroyed. They were using these tools to attack colonists and military personnel who came back to Earth. Captain Stevens had found evidence of dozens of attacks. Harris and his group had targeted people for months. They chose victims who were returning from service in the colonies. They especially focused on people of color like Maya. The attacks were coordinated and planned. Harris had been recording them to share with other members of the hate group. The body camera footage from the attack showed everything. Harris's own camera recorded his words and his actions. He had been smiling while the dog attacked Maya. He had made comments about teaching her a lesson. He said he wanted to show colonists that they were not welcome on Earth. Maya closed her eyes and felt tears running down her face. Her wedding day should have been the happiest day of her life. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare. Her beautiful dress was ruined. Her arm was badly injured. And worst of all, she had learned that there were people who hated her just because of where she served and the color of her skin. Jake wiped her tears gently and told her that the whole situation was going to trial. Harris would be charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and hate crimes. Tucker would also face charges for failing to stop the attack and for being part of Earth First. The news about the attack had spread quickly across Earth and all the colonies. People were outraged. Military personnel from every colony sent messages of support. Even civilians who had never left Earth were angry about what happened. The story was on every news channel and social media platform. Maya's mother came into the hospital room carrying flowers. She had been staying at a hotel nearby so she could visit every day. When she saw Maya was awake, she rushed to the bed and hugged her daughter carefully. She cried and told Maya how worried she had been. Lisa came to visit later that day. Her eyes were red from crying again. She held Maya's hand and apologized for not being able to protect her. Maya told her friend that none of this was her fault. No one could have predicted what would happen. Over the next few days, more visitors came. Carlos brought food from Maya's favorite restaurant. Commander Stevens came to check on her and promised that justice would be served. Even some of the other wedding guests whom Maya barely knew stopped by to offer support. The physical therapy started a week after Maya woke up. A therapist helped her move her arm in small exercises. The pain was terrible at first, but Maya pushed through it. She was determined to regain full use of her arm. She was a pilot and she needed both arms to fly. Jake stayed with her through every therapy session. He encouraged her when she wanted to give up. He held her when she cried from frustration and pain. He reminded her that she was the bravest person he knew. Maya asked Jake about the reception. He told her that all their guests had waited at the venue for hours. When they heard what happened, everyone went to the hospital instead. They had turned the waiting room into an impromptu party. People shared food and stories. They celebrated Maya and Jake's marriage even though the bride was unconscious in surgery. The wedding cake had been brought to the hospital. Jake said they cut it in the cafeteria and shared it with the doctors and nurses who were taking care of Maya. Everyone toasted to the couple and prayed for Maya's recovery. Maya smiled through her tears. Even though the day had been ruined, their friends had tried to make it special. Love had found a way to shine through the darkness. Captain Stevens visited again after 2 weeks. She brought news about the investigation. Earth First had members in 15 different cities. The group had been operating for 3 years. They had attacked more than 50 people. Some victims had been too scared to report what happened. Others had been told that no one would believe them. But now people were coming forward. The body camera footage of Maya's attack had inspired others to speak up. They were no longer afraid. They wanted justice and they wanted the hate group destroyed. Stevens told Maya that she would need to testify at the trial. Her testimony would be crucial in convicting Harris and exposing the full extent of Earth First's activities. Maya agreed without hesitation. She would face her attacker in court. She would tell everyone what happened. And she would make sure that no other person had to suffer like she had. Jake helped Maya practice walking around the hospital room. Her legs were weak from lying in bed for so long, but every day she got a little stronger. Every day the pain in her arm lessened slightly. Every day she felt more like herself. Maya looked at her scarred arm and made a decision. She would not hide the scars. She would not pretend the attack never happened. The scars were part of her story now. They showed that she had survived something terrible. They proved that hate had tried to break her but failed. She was Lieutenant Maya Okonkwo, decorated pilot and defender of humanity. And she was not going to let anyone make her feel less than human ever again. The trial date was set for 3 months after the attack. Maya spent those months recovering and preparing to face Derek Harris in court. Her arm healed slowly, but the physical therapy was working. She could move her fingers again and lift small objects. The doctors said she might regain full function eventually, but there would always be scars. The lead prosecutor was a woman named Karen Hughes. She was known for handling difficult cases, and she had never lost a hate crime trial. Karen came to meet Maya at her home in Seattle, where Maya was staying with Jake while she recovered. Karen was tall and professional with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She carried a briefcase full of documents and evidence. She sat down at Maya's kitchen table and spread out papers showing the full scope of what Earth First had done. The hate group had started small 5 years ago with just a dozen members who met in secret. They shared their beliefs on encrypted message boards and complained about colonists taking opportunities away from Earthborn citizens. But over time, the group grew larger and more dangerous. Harris had joined Earth First 3 years ago after his brother lost a job to someone who had returned from Mars Colony 7. Harris blamed colonists for economic problems on Earth. He believed they were getting special treatment and taking resources that should go to people who never left the planet. The group started with verbal harassment and vandalism. They would spray paint hateful messages on the homes of returning service members. They would post threatening messages online. But that was not enough for Harris. He wanted to take more direct action. Karen showed Maya evidence of other attacks that Harris had committed or helped plan. There was a pilot from Venus who had been beaten outside a grocery store. An engineer from the Jupiter stations who had his car destroyed. A family returning from Mars who found their apartment building set on fire. Maya felt sick looking at the photos. All these people had just been trying to live their lives. They had served humanity by working in the colonies and exploring space. And they had been attacked for it. Karen explained that the prosecution had overwhelming evidence. The body camera footage from Harris's own device showed the entire attack. His personal computer contained messages to other Earth First members where he bragged about what he had done. Police had found stolen military equipment in his home, including weapons and cybernetic parts. But Karen wanted more than just a conviction. She wanted to destroy Earth First completely. She wanted to show the world that hate groups would not be tolerated. She needed Maya's testimony to make that happen. Maya agreed to testify even though the thought terrified her. She would have to sit in a courtroom and face the man who had ruined her wedding day. She would have to describe the attack in detail while Harris stared at her. She would have to show her scars to a room full of strangers. Jake held her hand while Karen explained what would happen during the trial. The defense attorney would try to make Maya look bad. They might suggest she had done something to provoke the attack. They might try to make it seem like Harris was just doing his job as a police officer, but Karen promised that she would protect Maya on the witness stand. She would object to any unfair questions. She would make sure the jury understood exactly what had happened. Over the next few weeks, Maya met with Karen many times to prepare. They practiced her testimony over and over. Karen asked her the same questions in different ways. She taught Maya how to stay calm even when the defense attorney tried to upset her. Maya also met with other victims who would be testifying. There was a young man named Chris who had been attacked by Earth First members outside a spaceport. There was a woman named Sue who had her children threatened. There was an elderly couple who had been harassed for months before finally reporting it. Hearing their stories made Maya realize how big this problem was. Earth First had hurt so many people, and Harris was one of the worst members of the group. He had encouraged violence and helped recruit new members. The media attention was intense. News reporters wanted to interview Maya every day. They wanted photos of her scars. They wanted her to talk about her feelings. Maya declined most interviews, but she agreed to do one with a major news network. The interview was difficult, but Maya spoke clearly about what happened. She explained that she had spent 3 years protecting Earth and the colonies. She talked about the missions she had flown and the lives she had saved. She showed her wedding photos and described how happy she had been that day. Then she showed the photos from after the attack. Her torn wedding dress covered in blood, the bandages on her arm, the hospital room where she spent weeks recovering. The interviewer cried while listening to Maya's story. The interview was broadcast across Earth and every colony in the solar system. Billions of people watched it. The response was immediate and powerful. People were outraged. They demanded justice for Maya and all the other victims. Commander Stevens called Maya after the interview. She said that dozens more people had come forward with stories about Earth First attacks. The investigation was expanding to include cities across Earth, and even some colonies where Earth First had been recruiting members. Maya's mother worried that the stress was too much. She wanted Maya to rest and focus on healing, but Maya felt stronger than ever. She had a purpose now. She was going to help bring down a hate group and make sure they could never hurt anyone again. Jake supported Maya completely. He went with her to every meeting with Karen. He held her during nightmares when she woke up screaming about the attack. He reminded her every day that she was brave and strong. Lisa visited often and brought food and company. She told Maya stories about what was happening on Mars Colony 7. Everyone there was talking about the trial. They had set up a fundraiser to help pay for Maya's medical bills and therapy. Thousands of people had contributed. Carlo sent messages of support from his station near Saturn. He said everyone in their unit was proud of Maya. They were following the trial preparations closely, and they all planned to watch when it started. The Mars governor made a public statement, condemning Earth First and supporting Maya. She said that colonists were not separate from Earth. They were all part of one human family spread across the solar system. She called for unity instead of division. Similar statements came from leaders on Venus, the Jupiter stations, and smaller colonies throughout the system. The attack on Maya had become a symbol of a larger problem. Humanity was spreading to the stars, but old prejudices were still holding them back. Maya spent her evenings reading messages from people she had never met. They thanked her for her service. They told her she was an inspiration. They shared their own stories of discrimination and hate. They promised to support her during the trial. One message came from a young girl on Mars who wanted to be a pilot like Maya. She said she had been scared to apply to the flight academy because she was worried about prejudice. But after seeing Maya's courage, she decided to follow her dreams anyway. Maya cried reading that message. Something good was coming from her pain. People were finding strength in her story. They were refusing to let hate win. As the trial date approached, Maya felt nervous but ready. She had practiced her testimony until she could recite it perfectly. She had prepared herself mentally for facing Harris. She had accepted that the trial would be difficult and painful, but she also knew it was necessary. Harris needed to be held accountable for what he did. Earth First needed to be exposed and destroyed. And other victims needed to see that justice was possible. Jake asked Maya if she was sure she wanted to go through with it. He said they could move to another colony and try to forget what happened. They could start over somewhere new where no one knew their story. Maya shook her head. Running away would not solve anything. Earth First would still exist. They would still attack people. Other colonists would still live in fear. Maya needed to stand up and fight back. Not with violence, but with truth and courage. The night before the trial started, Maya and Jake renewed their wedding vows in a small, private ceremony at their home. Just the two of them and Maya's mother. They wore simple clothes and spoke simple words. But it felt more real and meaningful than the big ceremony that had been interrupted. They promised to love each other through good times and bad. They promised to support each other no matter what challenges came. They promised to build a life together that was full of hope instead of hate. Maya wore a simple silver bracelet that Jake had bought for her. It had words engraved on the inside that said brave and strong. Maya looked at those words and felt ready for what was coming. She was brave. She was strong. And she was going to face her attacker with her head held high. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before announcing they had reached a verdict. Maya sat in the courtroom with Jake on one side and her mother on the other. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Karen Hughes sat at the prosecution table looking confident, but Maya could see the tension in her shoulders. Derek Harris was brought back into the courtroom wearing the same orange jumpsuit. He looked pale and his hands shook slightly as the guards removed his handcuffs and seated him at the defense table. For the first time since the trial began, he looked scared. Judge Carter entered and everyone stood. The courtroom was completely silent except for the sound of her robes rustling as she took her seat. She asked the jury foreperson if they had reached a verdict. A middle-aged woman in the front row stood and said they had. The clerk took the written verdict from the foreperson and handed it to Judge Carter. The judge read it silently and then looked at Harris. Her expression revealed nothing. She handed the paper back to the clerk and instructed him to read the verdict aloud. The clerk cleared his throat and began reading. On the charge of attempted murder, the jury found Derek Harris guilty. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, guilty. On the charge of hate crime, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy, guilty. On every single charge, the jury had found him guilty. Maya felt tears running down her face. Jake squeezed her hand so tightly it hurt, but she did not care. Her mother sobbed quietly beside her. Around the courtroom, people reacted with relief and satisfaction. Some of the other victims who had testified cried and hugged each other. Harris dropped his head into his hands. His attorney put a hand on his shoulder but said nothing. There was nothing to say. The evidence had been overwhelming and the jury had seen the truth. Judge Carter banged her gavel to restore order. She thanked the jury for their service and dismissed them. She scheduled the sentencing hearing for 1 week later. She reminded everyone that the convicted would remain in custody until sentencing. Outside the courthouse, Karen spoke to the gathered media. She called the verdict a victory for justice and a message that hate crimes would not be tolerated. She praised Maya's courage in testifying and thanked all the victims who came forward. Maya made a brief statement to the reporters. She said she was grateful for the verdict, but reminded everyone that the fight against hate was not over. Earth First still had members in other cities. More work needed to be done to protect colonists and all people from violence and discrimination. The week before sentencing passed slowly. Maya tried to focus on her physical therapy and spending time with Jake, but her mind kept drifting to what would happen in court. Karen had told her that Harris could face 40 years in prison. That seemed like justice, but Maya felt conflicted. She thought about what 40 years in prison would mean. Harris would be an old man when he was released if he lived that long. His life would be over. Part of Maya wanted that. She wanted him to suffer for what he did. But another part of her wondered if there was a better way. Maya had always believed in rehabilitation over pure punishment. She had seen people change and grow. She had watched colonists who were once enemies become friends after working together. She wondered if even someone like Harris could change if given the chance. Jake listened to her thoughts one evening as they sat on their apartment balcony watching the sunset. He admitted he was angry and wanted Harris to rot in prison, but he also trusted Maya's judgment. If she thought there was another path, he would support her. Maya spent the next few days thinking deeply about what she wanted. She talked to her mother, who reminded her that forgiveness was not about letting someone off the hook. It was about freeing yourself from the burden of hate. She talked to Lisa over a video call, and her friend encouraged her to follow her heart. Finally, Maya called Karen and asked if she could make a special request during the sentencing hearing. Karen listened carefully to what Maya proposed. At first, the prosecutor was shocked and skeptical. But as Maya explained her reasoning, Karen began to understand. The day of sentencing arrived and the courtroom was packed again. Media from across Earth and the colonies had sent representatives. This was not just about one case anymore. It had become a symbol of humanity's struggle to overcome prejudice as they spread across the solar system. Judge Carter called the court to order and asked if anyone wished to make statements before she announced the sentence. Karen stood and said that Lieutenant Maya Okonkwo had a victim impact statement to deliver. Maya walked slowly to the witness stand. Her scarred arm was visible to everyone in the courtroom. She had chosen to wear a sleeveless dress specifically so people could see what Harris had done to her. She wanted him to see the permanent damage he had caused. She looked directly at Harris as she began to speak. Her voice was clear and strong, even though her hands trembled. She told the court about the day that should have been the happiest of her life. She described putting on her wedding dress and feeling beautiful. She talked about walking down the aisle and seeing Jake waiting for her. Then she described the attack in detail. She spoke about the pain of the mechanical teeth tearing into her flesh. She described waking up in the hospital and learning that days had passed. She talked about the long recovery and the nightmares that still woke her at night. She showed the jury and everyone watching the scars on her arm. She explained that she would never have full use of that arm again. Her career as a pilot might be over. Her dream of flying missions to the outer colonies might never happen. But then Maya's statement took a turn that shocked the courtroom. She said that despite all the pain Harris had caused, she did not want pure revenge. She wanted something more meaningful. She wanted change. Maya explained that putting Harris in prison for 40 years would remove one hateful person from society, but it would not change his beliefs. It would not stop other Earth First members from committing attacks. It would not heal the divisions between Earthborn people and colonists. She proposed something different. She asked Judge Carter to consider an alternative sentence. Harris could serve 10 years instead of 40 if he agreed to participate in the Colonial Service Rehabilitation Program. The program was experimental and had only been used in a few cases. It required convicted criminals to work alongside the very people they had victimized. Harris would be sent to Mars Colony 7 where Maya served. He would work in construction and support, roles helping to build the society he claimed to hate. He would be supervised constantly, and any violation of the program, rules would result in immediate return to Earth to serve the full 40-year sentence. But if he successfully completed 10 years of service, he would earn his freedom and a chance at redemption. The courtroom erupted in shocked conversation. Judge Carter banged her gavel repeatedly to restore order. Harris looked up at Maya with an expression of complete confusion. He had expected her to demand the maximum punishment. Maya continued speaking. She said that she believed people could change if given the opportunity. She said that working alongside colonists would teach Harris that they were not inferior or dangerous. He would see that people from all backgrounds contributed to humanity's future. She acknowledged that some people would think she was being too soft. They would say Harris deserved to suffer. But Maya argued that revenge was not the same as justice. Real justice meant trying to prevent future harm. If Harris could be rehabilitated, he could eventually help dismantle the hate groups that caused so much pain. Maya looked at Harris one more time. She told him that she was giving him a choice. He could spend 40 years in prison hating colonists and learning nothing. Or he could spend 10 years on Mars learning to be a better person. The choice was his. She stepped down from the witness stand and returned to her seat. Jake hugged her tightly and whispered that he was proud of her. Around the courtroom, people whispered and debated what they had just heard. Karen stood and formally presented Maya's proposal to the court. She provided documentation about the Colonial Service Rehabilitation Program. She explained the strict conditions and constant supervision Harris would face. She noted that the program had shown promising results in the few cases where it had been used. The defense attorney looked stunned, but quickly stood to confer with his client. Harris and his lawyer spoke in urgent whispers for several minutes. Finally, the attorney announced that Harris wanted to address the court. Harris stood shakily. His voice was rough and low. He said that he did not understand why Maya was offering him this chance. He admitted that he had planned to hurt her. He had wanted to teach colonists a lesson. He had believed that people like her were ruining Earth. But watching the trial and hearing all the testimony had shown him things he had never considered. He had seen the pain he caused not just to Maya but to dozens of other people. He had heard about the lives saved by colonists and the important work they did. Harris said he was not sure he deserved a second chance. But if Maya was willing to offer it, he would accept. He would go to Mars and try to learn. He would try to become better than he had been. Judge Carter listened to everything and then announced she needed time to consider this unusual request. She called a recess until the next morning when she would announce her decision. The courthouse was surrounded by people when Maya and Jake arrived on the first day of the trial. News cameras lined the street and reporters shouted questions. Police officers formed a barrier to keep everyone back. Maya held Jake's hand tightly as they walked up the courthouse steps. Inside the building, security was heavy. Everyone had to pass through metal detectors and bag searches. The courthouse had received threats from Earth First supporters who did not want the trial to happen. But the judge refused to be intimidated. She promised the trial would proceed and justice would be served. Maya sat in the witness waiting room with Jake and Karen Hughes. Other victims who would testify were there too. Everyone looked nervous. Karen reminded them that they were brave for coming forward. She promised that the evidence was strong and the jury would see the truth. The courtroom was large with wood paneling on the walls and rows of seats for observers. The jury box sat to one side with 12 empty chairs waiting for the jurors who would decide Harris's fate. The judge's bench stood elevated at the front of the room. Derek Harris was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked thinner than Maya remembered. His face was pale and his eyes darted around the room. When he saw Maya sitting in the gallery, his expression hardened with anger. Maya forced herself to look at him without showing fear. This man had hurt her, but he would not break her. She sat up straight and kept her scarred arm visible. She wanted him to see that she had survived. The judge entered and everyone stood. Judge Helen Carter was a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had a reputation for being fair but strict. She would not tolerate any nonsense in her courtroom. The jury selection took 2 days. Karen and the defense attorney questioned potential jurors carefully. They needed 12 people who could be impartial and fair. The defense wanted jurors who might be sympathetic to Harris. Karen wanted jurors who understood the seriousness of hate crimes. Finally, the jury was seated. 7 women and 5 men from different backgrounds and ages. They swore an oath to consider only the evidence and follow the law. Karen gave her opening statement first. She walked the jury through what happened on Maya's wedding day. She described how a decorated military officer had been attacked for no reason other than prejudice and hate. She promised to show evidence that Harris was not just a bad cop, but a member of a dangerous hate group. The defense attorney was a man named Paul Crawford. He argued that Harris had been following police procedures. He suggested that Maya and Jake had been acting suspiciously. He tried to make it sound like the attack was a tragic accident rather than a deliberate act of violence. But Karen had prepared for this. She knew the defense would try to blame the victims. She was ready to prove that Harris had planned the attack and used it to terrorize colonists. The first witnesses were the police officers who had responded to the scene. They described finding Maya bleeding on the ground with Jake trying to stop the cybernetic dog. They testified that Harris had been smiling and recording the attack. They said Tucker had done nothing to help. One officer named Gary spoke about how shocked he was to see the cybernetic K9 unit. Those units were supposed to be destroyed. They were too dangerous for civilian use. He could not understand how Harris had gotten access to one. The emergency medical workers who treated Maya testified next. They described the severity of her injuries. They showed photos of the wounds that made several jury members look away in horror. They explained that Maya could have died from blood loss if they had not arrived quickly. Karen played the body camera footage from Harris's uniform. The courtroom fell silent as everyone watched. The footage showed the entire attack from Harris's perspective. His voice was clear as he made racist comments about Maya. The image showed his face smiling as the dog attacked. Several jury members looked sick watching the video. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. The footage was damning evidence that could not be explained away. Jake testified about what happened. His voice shook with emotion as he described watching his new wife being attacked. He talked about feeling helpless as he tried to pull the dog away. He showed his own scars from where the mechanical teeth had cut him. The defense attorney tried to suggest that Jake had provoked the situation by arguing with Harris. But Jake calmly explained that he had been polite and cooperative. He had simply asked what the problem was. That should not result in his wife being mauled by a dangerous animal. Captain Nicole Stevens testified about her investigation into Earth First. She brought evidence of encrypted messages between Harris and other group members. She showed social media posts where they discussed targeting colonists. She presented a manifesto that Harris had written calling for colonists to be expelled from Earth. The evidence was overwhelming. Stevens had traced the cybernetic K-9 unit to a military base where equipment was supposed to be destroyed. Harris had contacts inside the base who helped him steal decommissioned items. The investigation had uncovered a network of theft and illegal weapons trading. Other victims testified about their experiences with Earth First. Chris described being beaten outside a spaceport, while members shouted slurs at him. Sue talked about threats made against her children because she had worked on Venus. An elderly man named George told how his home had been vandalized repeatedly. Each testimony painted a picture of systematic harassment and violence. This was not random crime. This was organized hate targeting specific people because of where they lived and worked. The defense tried to argue that Harris was just one person acting alone, but the evidence showed clear connections between him and other Earth First members. Messages proved they planned attacks together and celebrated when colonists were hurt. Karen brought in an expert on hate groups who explained how Earth First recruited members. The expert described the group's ideology and their belief that colonists were inferior. He testified that groups like this became more dangerous over time. They started with words and escalated to violence. The prosecutor showed financial records proving that Harris had donated money to Earth First. He had purchased equipment for the group. He had hosted meetings at his home where members discussed their plans. Tucker, the other officer, had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He took the stand looking nervous and ashamed. He admitted that he knew Harris belonged to Earth First. He said he should have stopped the attack, but he was afraid of Harris. Tucker described how Harris had talked about teaching colonists a lesson. He said Harris specifically looked for opportunities to harass people returning from the colonies. Harris would pull them over on false pretenses and try to provoke confrontations. The defense attorney tried to attack Tucker's credibility, since he was testifying to reduce his own charges. But his testimony matched all the other evidence. The pieces of the case fit together perfectly. Maya watched all of this from the gallery. She took notes and whispered with Jake. Some testimonies made her cry. Hearing other victims describe their trauma reminded her of her own pain. But it also made her feel less alone. During breaks in the trial, reporters tried to interview Maya. She usually declined, but she made one brief statement on the courthouse steps. She thanked everyone for their support. She said she hoped the trial would bring justice not just for her, but for all victims of hate. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every day the courtroom was packed with observers. News coverage was constant across Earth and the colonies. People debated the case in homes and workplaces. Everyone had an opinion about what should happen to Harris. Harris himself rarely showed emotion during the trial. He sat at the defense table staring straight ahead. Sometimes he would glance at Maya with what looked like contempt, but mostly he appeared cold and distant. His defense attorney tried various strategies. He suggested Maya's injuries were exaggerated. He claimed the body camera footage was taken out of context. He argued that Earth First was just a social club that did not promote violence. But none of these arguments held up against the mountain of evidence. Karen methodically destroyed each defense theory. She showed medical records proving the severity of Maya's injuries. She played the full body camera footage showing there was no context that made the attack acceptable. She presented Earth First's own documents calling for violent action against colonists. As the prosecution's case concluded, everyone in the courtroom knew that Harris was guilty. The evidence was too strong to ignore. But the question remained about what his punishment would be. Karen told Maya that the sentencing phase would be crucial. If convicted, Harris could face up to 40 years in prison. But Maya would have the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. She could tell the judge how the attack had affected her life. Maya spent evenings preparing what she would say. She wanted her words to matter. She wanted to speak not just for herself, but for everyone who had been hurt by hate. She wanted to make sure that Harris understood the consequences of his actions. The trial was coming to a close and soon the jury would deliberate. Maya felt anxious but hopeful. Justice seemed within reach. 3 years passed and life moved forward for Maya and Jake. They had completed their assignment near Saturn and were preparing to return to Mars Colony 7. Their time on the research station had been peaceful and productive. Maya had fully regained her piloting skills and Jake had been promoted to commander. They had built a good life together among the stars. But Maya often wondered about Derek Harris. She had received quarterly reports about his progress in the rehabilitation program. The reports were brief and formal, but they indicated he was following the rules and completing his assigned work. Maya was curious to see for herself how he had changed or if he had changed at all. The couple landed on Mars on a bright morning, when the red dust sparkled in the sunlight. The colony had grown significantly in 3 years. New habitat domes dotted the landscape, and the population had doubled. Maya felt a sense of pride knowing she had helped protect and build this community. Commander Stevens met them at the landing pad and greeted them warmly. She had aged slightly with more gray in her hair, but her smile was genuine. She told Maya that there was something she needed to see, something that would surprise her. Stevens led them to one of the construction sites where a new residential dome was being built. Workers in environmental suits moved across the structure installing panels and checking systems. The work was difficult and dangerous but essential for the colony's expansion. One worker stood apart from the others, taking a break and drinking water. Even in the bulky environmental suit, Maya recognized something familiar about his movements. Stevens confirmed what Maya had already guessed. The worker was Derek Harris. Maya watched him for several minutes without approaching. Harris looked thinner and his movements were careful and deliberate. He worked steadily without complaint. Other workers around him treated him normally. There was no sign of the hatred or superiority that had defined him 3 years ago. Stevens explained that Harris had been a model participant in the program. He had struggled at first with the hard physical labor and the isolation from Earth. He had been angry and resentful for the first 6 months. But gradually something had shifted in him. Working alongside colonists every day had forced Harris to see them as individuals, rather than as a faceless group to hate. He had learned their stories and their struggles. He had discovered that people from every background shared the same hopes and fears. The prejudice that had seemed so important on Earth had crumbled under the weight of daily human interaction. Harris had been required to attend counseling sessions twice a week. A psychologist named Dr. Raymond Chen worked with him to understand the roots of his hatred. Together they had explored how fear and economic insecurity had been twisted into racial prejudice. They had worked on building empathy and understanding. The breakthrough had come about a year into the program. A dust storm had damaged part of the colony, and Harris had been part of the emergency repair crew. Working alongside people he once hated to save lives had changed something fundamental in him. He had seen colonists risk their lives to save others. He had witnessed courage and selflessness that contradicted everything Earth First had taught him. After that, Harris had thrown himself into the rehabilitation program with genuine commitment. He had volunteered for extra counseling sessions. He had started reading about colonial history and the contributions of diverse communities. He had even begun writing letters of apology to his victims, though many chose not to respond. Maya asked Stevens if she could speak to Harris. The commander agreed and walked over to where he was resting. She said something Maya could not hear, and Harris looked up sharply. Even through the helmet visor, Maya could see shock on his face. Harris walked slowly toward where Maya stood with Jake. He stopped a respectful distance away and removed his helmet. His face was weathered from 3 years of Mars sun and hard work. His eyes looked different than Maya remembered. They held something that might have been humility or shame or both. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Harris said that he had not expected to see Maya again. He had hoped she was living a good life far from Mars and far from reminders of what he had done to her. Maya said she wanted to see how he was doing. She wanted to know if the program was working. Harris looked down at his hands and said he did not know if he deserved to say the program was working. He had spent 3 years trying to become a different person. Some days he thought he was succeeding. Other days he felt like the same hateful man who had ordered a dog to attack an innocent woman. But he was trying. Every day he got up and worked hard. Every day he tried to treat people with respect regardless of where they were born or what they looked like. Every day he tried to be better than he had been. Jake stood close to Maya with his hand on her shoulder. He had less forgiveness in his heart than his wife. He asked Harris bluntly if he felt remorse for what he had done, or if he was just going through the motions to avoid prison. Harris met Jake's eyes directly. He said that at first he had just been going through the motions. He had been angry about being sent to Mars and working in difficult conditions. But somewhere along the way, genuine remorse had set in. He understood now the pain he had caused. He understood that Maya and all the other people he had hurt were human beings who deserved respect and safety. He said he would never be able to make up for what he had done. No amount of work or apologies could undo the scars on Maya's arm or the trauma she had experienced. But he was committed to spending the rest of his life trying to prevent others from walking the path he had walked. Maya listened carefully to his words. She searched his face for signs of deception but found none. This man seemed genuinely different from the angry officer who had smiled while a dog attacked her. Time would tell if the change was permanent, but for now it seemed real. She told Harris that she hoped he would complete the program successfully. She said that everyone deserved a chance to change and grow. She reminded him that 7 more years remained in his sentence and he would need to continue working hard to prove himself. Harris nodded and said he understood. He thanked Maya for giving him this opportunity even though he knew he did not deserve it. He said her example of compassion had taught him more about humanity than anything else in his life. Maya and Jake left the construction site and returned to their quarters in the main colony. That evening, Maya sat down to record a message that would be broadcast across Earth and every colony in the solar system. The message had been requested by several news organizations who wanted an update on the case that had captivated the world. 3 years earlier, Maya appeared on camera wearing her military uniform with her medals displayed. Her scarred arm was visible and she made no attempt to hide it. She spoke clearly and confidently about what she had witnessed that day at the construction site. She explained that Derek Harris was 3 years into his rehabilitation program and showing genuine signs of change. She acknowledged that some people would remain skeptical. They would argue that he was just putting on an act to avoid returning to prison. But Maya had looked into his eyes and seen something different than the hatred that had been there before. She talked about the importance of giving people opportunities to change. She said that humanity was spreading across the solar system, but old prejudices were following them. If people could not learn to overcome hate, the same problems would exist on every world they colonized. Maya acknowledged the pain that Harris had caused her. She showed her scarred arm to the camera and talked about the nightmares and trauma that still affected her sometimes. She said forgiveness did not mean forgetting or minimizing what happened. It meant choosing to focus on the future rather than being trapped in the past. She explained that Earth First had been largely dismantled due to the investigation that followed her case. Over 200 members had been arrested and many had entered rehabilitation programs. The organization that once seemed so powerful had collapsed when its members realized there were consequences for hate. But Maya warned that new hate groups could always form. Prejudice was not destroyed by a single trial or a single act of forgiveness. It required constant vigilance and commitment from everyone. People needed to speak up when they witnessed discrimination. They needed to challenge hateful ideas when they encountered them. Maya concluded by saying that her wedding day had turned into a tragedy, but something meaningful had emerged from that tragedy. Laws had been strengthened to protect colonists. Conversations about prejudice and justice had happened across the solar system, and one hateful man had been given the chance to become better. She held up her hand showing her wedding ring. She said that despite everything that happened, she and Jake had built a beautiful life together. They had not let hate win. They had chosen love and hope and forgiveness. That was the real ending to her story. The message went viral within hours of being posted. Billions of people across Earth and the colonies watched it. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People praised Maya's continued courage and her commitment to rehabilitation over revenge. Several months after that message, Maya received a request from Derek Harris. He asked if she would be willing to meet with him again. He wanted to show her something he had been working on. Maya could not sleep the night before Judge Carter announced her decision. She lay awake staring at the ceiling while Jake slept beside her. She kept replaying her statement in her mind and wondering if she had done the right thing. Part of her wanted to take back the offer and demand that Harris serve the full 40 years. But a deeper part knew that revenge would not heal anything. Morning came slowly and Maya got dressed carefully. She chose a blue dress that Jake said made her look strong and professional. She looked at herself in the mirror and practiced taking deep breaths. Today would determine whether her vision of justice was possible, or if the system would choose traditional punishment. The courthouse was even more crowded than before. News of Maya's unusual proposal had spread across Earth and every colony. People wanted to know what the judge would decide. Some protesters stood outside holding signs that said Harris deserved maximum punishment. Others held signs praising Maya's compassion. Inside the courtroom, Maya sat with Jake and her mother in their usual seats. Karen Hughes looked nervous at the prosecution table. She had told Maya that judges rarely accepted alternative sentencing in such serious cases. The law usually demanded harsh punishment for violent hate crimes. Derek Harris was brought in looking tired and anxious. He had spent the night in his cell probably wondering the same things Maya had been wondering. His fate rested in the hands of a judge who had a reputation for being tough on crime. Judge Carter entered and everyone stood. The judge looked serious as she took her seat and arranged papers on her bench. She asked everyone to sit and then began speaking in her clear, authoritative voice. She started by acknowledging the severity of Harris's crimes. She reviewed the evidence and the jury's guilty verdict on all charges. She noted that the attempted murder of a decorated military officer on her wedding day was particularly heinous. The attack had been motivated by racial prejudice and hatred of colonists. Under normal circumstances, Judge Carter said, she would impose the maximum sentence of 40 years without hesitation. Harris had shown no remorse until facing the consequences of his actions. He had been part of a hate group that terrorized innocent people. He had used stolen military equipment to cause serious harm. But then the judge paused and looked directly at Maya. She said that Lieutenant Okonkwo's victim impact statement had given her much to consider. The proposal for alternative sentencing was unusual and controversial. Many people would disagree with showing mercy to someone who had shown none. However, Judge Carter continued, the traditional justice system had not stopped hate groups like Earth First from growing. Putting members in prison just created martyrs that other members rallied around. Perhaps a different approach was needed. The judge explained that she had spent the evening researching the Colonial Service Rehabilitation Program. She had spoken with experts and reviewed case studies. The program had shown surprisingly good results in the few instances where it had been used. Criminals who worked alongside their victims often developed empathy and understanding that prison could not teach. Judge Carter looked at Harris and asked him to stand. She asked if he truly understood what accepting this program would mean. He would spend 10 years on Mars working under harsh conditions. He would be supervised constantly and have no freedom. He would face the people he had hated and learn to see them as equals. Harris nodded and said he understood. His voice was barely audible, but he managed to say that he wanted the chance to change. He said he knew he did not deserve it, but he would work every day to become worthy of the mercy he was being shown. The judge was silent for a long moment. The courtroom held its collective breath. Finally, Judge Carter spoke. She accepted Maya's proposal with strict conditions. Derek Harris would serve 10 years in the Colonial Service Rehabilitation Program on Mars Colony 7. He would work in construction and support roles under constant supervision. He would attend mandatory counseling, sessions and education programs about the history and contributions of colonists. If Harris violated any rules or showed any signs of the hateful behavior that led to his crimes, he would immediately be returned to Earth to serve the full 40-year sentence. He would wear a monitoring device at all times. His communications would be monitored. He would have no privacy and no freedom. But if he successfully completed the 10 years and showed genuine change, he would be released with the requirement that he spend the following 5 years working to dismantle hate groups. He would speak at schools and community centers. He would use his experience to prevent others from following the path of hatred he had walked. Judge Carter emphasized that this was not leniency. This was an opportunity for Harris to earn redemption through hard work and genuine change. It was also an experiment to see if rehabilitation could work better than simple incarceration. The judge then turned to address the broader issues the case had raised. She condemned Earth First and all similar hate groups in the strongest terms. She called for increased law enforcement focus on dismantling these organizations. She urged lawmakers to strengthen protections for colonists returning to Earth. She praised Maya's courage not just in surviving the attack, but in offering a path toward healing rather than perpetuating cycles of revenge. Judge Carter said that Maya embodied the best qualities of humanity and served as an example for everyone. The sentence was finalized and Harris would be transferred to Mars within the month. Judge Carter banged her gavel and declared the court adjourned. Guards immediately surrounded Harris to escort him out. But before they led him away, Harris turned to look at Maya. Their eyes met across the courtroom. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. Finally, he just nodded slowly. Maya nodded back. An understanding passed between them that needed no words. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was intense. Reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. Karen Hughes made a statement praising the judge's decision and expressing hope that the rehabilitation program would succeed. She announced that the investigation into Earth First was ongoing, and more arrests were expected. Maya stood at the microphone with Jake beside her. She thanked the judge for her wisdom and courage. She said that justice did not always mean the harshest punishment. Sometimes it meant trying to fix what was broken rather than simply destroying it. She acknowledged that many people would disagree with the sentence. She understood their anger and their desire to see Harris suffer, but she asked them to consider whether suffering alone would prevent future attacks. Would it stop other Earth First members from hurting people? Would it heal the divisions between Earth-born citizens and colonists? Maya believed that showing Harris a different way was worth trying. If he could change, if he could learn to see colonists as fellow humans worthy of respect, then maybe he could help change others. Maybe he could share his story and prevent young people from joining hate groups. She admitted it was a risk. Harris might fail. He might return to his old ways. But Maya thought the risk was worth taking if there was even a chance of success. The news coverage after the sentencing was extensive. Debate raged across every platform and media outlet. Some people called Maya a hero and praised her compassion. They said she represented the best of humanity and showed that forgiveness was possible even after terrible harm. Others criticized the decision harshly. They argued that Harris was getting off easy. They said 10 years on Mars was nothing compared to 40 years in a maximum security prison. They worried that the lenient sentence would encourage other hate group members. Maya tried to ignore the criticism, but some of it hurt. She received threatening messages from Earth First sympathizers who called her a traitor. She also received angry messages from people who thought she should have demanded harsher punishment. But she also received thousands of supportive messages. Colonists from across the solar system thanked her for standing up for rehabilitation over revenge. Parents wrote to say they were teaching their children about her example. Teachers said they were using the case to discuss justice and forgiveness in their classrooms. Commander Stevens visited Maya a few days after the sentencing. She brought news that the investigation into Earth First had resulted in over 100 arrests across 15 cities. The organization was being systematically dismantled. Evidence found in raids had led to more victims coming forward and more prosecutions. Stevens told Maya that her decision to offer Harris rehabilitation had actually helped the investigation. Other Earth First members who were arrested saw that there was a path to redemption. Several had agreed to cooperate with authorities in exchange for the possibility of entering rehabilitation programs themselves. The hate group was collapsing from within. Members were turning on each other and providing information to avoid harsh sentences. Within a year, Earth First would be effectively destroyed as an organization. Maya felt proud hearing this news. Her decision had been about more than just one man. It had been about trying to break cycles of hate and violence. It seemed to be working. Jake got orders for a new assignment on one of the Saturn moons. Maya was cleared to return to active duty despite her arm injury. The doctor said she had recovered enough function to pilot again, though she would need to continue physical therapy.